Hi BookTube, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hey hi, my name is Kristen and I'm an author, and I'm currently working on a second chance romance that is very much Emily Henry coded. Think happy place, think exes who never fully fell out of love. There's some meddling best friends, some forced proximity, and definitely a ton of banter and tension. Basically the kind of book that I like to read. And I have some big updates on where I am in the process of getting this ready to query in the spring. I am officially in the thick of my editing phase, and things are getting pretty serious. Like, I have a list of literary agents that I'm prepared to reach out to, kind of serious. I also have a couple of drafts of my query letters done. So I will be diving back into the world of trying to get a literary agent very, very soon. And I'm pretty sure I'm ready. Mostly ready. So buckle up, I got a lot to talk to you guys about today. But today I just wanted to give you guys an in-depth look at where I'm at with my editing, what my editing process looks like, and how I'm feeling about querying again for the first time in I don't know how long. So I finished the first full draft of this manuscript back in January, and then I did something I do with every single book that feels kind of painful but also very necessary, and I set it aside. I didn't look at it, I didn't touch it, I didn't even think about it for the whole entire month of February. And then last weekend was the first time that I had cracked that bad boy open and was ready to look at it with fresh eyes. And the reason I do this is so that I can get a bit of space from it and I can come back to it ready to edit as a reader rather than a writer. A lot of people ask me, what does that mean? How do you even turn your author brain off? I don't understand how that process works. And honestly, I do think giving it that space is the most crucial step in this process. And then after that, I'm able to come back to the book and read it like a reader and think, okay, how does this feel? How does this flow? Rather than looking at how does it function? What's going on with the grammar? What's going on with the syntax? I try not to do that in my first pass through of the edit. I often get asked why I do this, what's the importance of doing this? And for me, at least, when I am too close to my writing for too long, imposter syndrome kicks in somewhere down the line and I start to think this whole thing is awful. I hate it. I can't believe anybody would ever let me write. I don't know why my brain does that. I'm sure it's a form of perfectionism and trying to keep me from failing. So the only way through that is literally to take a step back, focus on other things. I was reading tons of other books outside of my genre, in my genre, just trying to not think about what I had written. And then that way I can come back to it and it feels like a brand new book to me. And let me just say, with past books that I've worked on, giving them space for a month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever it may have been, and then coming back to them, I often found that first read through as a bit of a roller coaster. I think as an author and as a writer, you're often growing and learning and evolving, especially with your first book for sure. But for me, it felt like my first 3 or 4 books until I kind of got into a place where I better understood my writing process. And with this last book, I definitely felt like I was a much cleaner first drafter, and that helped tremendously with going through the first time looking for developmental editing tweaks that I could make. Because there would be times in the past with previous books where I was doing large rewrites, huge overhauls of the book. It went from one book in the beginning to a completely different book at the end of the process. And I feel very grateful that that did not happen this go round. Like I said, my writing process has become way more refined over the years, and I've also gone from being a complete pantser where I'm winging it all the time to pantsing in the beginning, and then when I feel like I'm losing steam, I've outlined where I want the story to go, both plot-wise, emotional-wise, and character arc-wise, and then I've picked back up and written from there, and I think that has made a world of a difference in the way that my first draft looked for this book specifically. So for anyone that doesn't know, developmental editing is more about big picture editing. This means I'm not really looking for typos or grammar or really even kind of sentence structure. I'm just looking at how the book feels as a book. And I'm just trying to make sure that the story itself makes sense. So some of the stuff I focus on would be, do these characters feel real and do their arcs feel smooth? Is the pacing strong or does it sort of drag in some places? And are the emotional beats hitting the way that I'm wanting to, or are there things that I could take out or add in to make sure that everything flows and makes sense? So while I was doing this, I actually had a notebook beside me and I was reading through on the computer, and when I felt something feel off, I would jot it down in the notebook along with a couple of suggestions to myself, like maybe think about this or think about that, and explaining to myself what felt wrong or off and how I could fix it. So I definitely had some small tweaks that I had to make, but nothing like too glaringly bad. I especially think I was focused on making sure the character growth felt real and natural. And I often find that sometimes the middle of the book needs to be tightened up a bit. For me at least, stories come to me when I'm really excited about the beginning and I'm super excited about the end, but filling in the middle can sometimes feel like you're writing a totally different book than what you sat down prepared to work on. So when coming back to editing, usually the tweaks I need to make are somewhere in that middle, somewhere in that like meat and potatoes crux of the book, just making sure that it meshes the beginning and the end together seamlessly. I think another really important thing writing romance is not only that the romance is there and you can see the characters falling in love, but one of the things I really love about the genre itself is showcasing the main character outside of the relationship. So there were definitely parts where I had to go back and say, hey, what do we think about this with her and her career? What do we think about this with her and her family? Because I don't want it to be so single-mindedly focused on the central relationship that we forget that these characters have lives outside of the person that they're interested in. And I think for me, that's what I like to read, and it makes for a really well-rounded story, a well-rounded character who feels so real that when readers close the book, they can't believe that that person is not sitting right beside them. So the good news is that I didn't have to make a ton of tweaks. There were a couple of things that I wrote down in my notebook, but they were very small, minor things that I went back and corrected within the day or the following day. And so now again, I'm putting the manuscript aside. I'm reading other books this week to kind of give myself space, because this weekend I will be going back to do line editing and copy editing. And if you're wondering what the difference is between the two, have no fear. Let me break it down for you. So line editing is where I'm focusing far more on sentence structure, on word choice, and my prose, making sure that they flow in a very specific way that I like for them to flow. It's also making sure that each sentence is as tight and as clear as possible. I just want to make sure that I'm not becoming long-winded or repetitive, so I cut out any unnecessary words, and I also make sure that I'm not leaning too heavily on any type of word. So that was another thing I wrote down in my developmental phase. I was noticing certain words were being repeated quite often, and that's fine. It makes sense. I write these chapters at different times, so it's not like it's always at the forefront of my mind what words I've used in every single scene. But as I was reading it as a reader, I was like, oh, here are my crutch words. So now that I have those written down, I can go back during line editing and look for them specifically, see if there are other synonyms I can use in their place, or if I want to change the sentence structure completely so that that word isn't used, or I'm not leaning too heavily on the same actions over and over and over again, which again, I think for my writing can be a very common thing that I do, where I'm in the scene and I'm showing what the characters are doing, and then when I go back and reread, I realize that I've already shown them doing some of these things. I don't need to show it again. Readers are very smart. They understand you don't have to beat them over the head with any sort of concept. I try to stick to the rule of 3, try to mention it no more than 3 times. That way it doesn't become overbearing, but if it's something that I feel like is important, I've mentioned it enough that the reader will pick up on it. And again, this is something I've gotten way better at in my first drafts than when I first started writing. One thing that I used to do when I was a beginning writer was I would write very passive sentences. So I would have the main character hearing things and seeing things, and they would say, I heard so-and-so say this, or I saw so-and-so do this. And as I became a more skilled writer and I honed in on my craft, and that came from reading a lot of different books, I was able to figure out how to make things more action forward, and that really draws the reader into the mind of the main character, and it also just makes things cleaner and punchier. So instead of I saw so and so do that, it would say this character blank, like this character did blank. Another quick tip for how you can sort of clean up your writing is just look for words that can take the place of like a longer phrase or sentence. So for example, if you're saying I ran quickly across the room, you could shorten that to say I sprinted. You know, it gives your reader an idea of exactly the type of action that the character is doing with far less words to weigh them down. Since I wrote down what I think needs to be tightened up, I don't think that that's going to take me too long to do either, which means pretty soon I'm just going to go right into the copy editing phase. And copy editing is where you get down to the nitty-gritty of your manuscript. So this is where you're looking for grammar, this is where you're looking for punctuation, this is where you're looking for maybe a misspelled word or a letter that got left out of a word, and this is where I really take my time. Of course, human error is natural, and I think when it comes to querying, most agents aren't looking for it to be perfect. However, if you're not getting ready to query and you're a self-published author and you're doing it all yourself, I do think this is the part of editing that needs to take the most amount of time. You have to go through everything line by line. I've seen people print out their manuscripts before because getting it off the screen can be helpful to see it in person and hold it and read and make sure nothing is glaringly bad. And then one last thing that I like to do, and again I've gotten into the habit of this because I've self-published 6 books at this point, is that I like to do one last read through where I read things out loud, because sometimes the way we hear things in our head doesn't necessarily come across when it's said out loud. So this is where I can pick up on any dialogue that doesn't feel right or it feels kind of clunky. This is where I can feel if too many action words are being used, or we need more dialogue or inner monologue. And I never want to lean too heavily on exposition versus dialogue, so I really try to make sure there's a balance. And again, I think reading it out loud really shows me where those kind of holes need to be plugged in, or if anything needs to go and be left behind. So that's something I'm planning to work on this weekend, which means I am way ahead of schedule here. I thought I would not be ready to query until closer to April or May, but again, because the book felt like it was in such good condition, that I think after copy editing, I might potentially be ready to start querying. Because while I had set my manuscript aside for a month, I did decide to work on a couple of drafts of my query letter. That way I didn't feel like that was something I was doing at the last minute and rushing, because typically once the manuscript is done, I feel this excitement to just get it out there. So I wanted to make sure I had my documents ready for pitching, ready to go by the time the manuscript is done. I do have a list of literary agents that I'm very excited to reach out to, so pretty soon I think it'll be time to go. I may be ready by the end of the month to start doing this. My game plan here is to query in batches, and I'm focusing on small batches, so I'm thinking no more than like 5 to 10 agents a month. I do know from past experience, because this is not my first rodeo querying, that it can often take agents anywhere from a month to 8 to 12 weeks. They'll tell you what their response rate is, or if you're using Query Tracker, you can kind of see what their response rate is. So I don't want to query too many people at one time and then start to receive a whole bunch of rejections at once, because if I can throw some out there and see if I get any sort of response outside of a form rejection, that might be really good feedback for me to take and apply to the query letter and apply to the manuscript before I start querying again. But I am trying to be as strategic as possible about this. Like I said, I've done this before. So I actually queried my first book that I ever wrote back in, I guess it would have been 2021, the end of 2021 / the beginning of 2022. And that taught me a lot about the process. One, it taught me there's a lot of waiting that happens when you're querying. These literary agents are getting hundreds of queries a month, so it can be hard for them to stay on top of those. And so patience is definitely a virtue within this process. I also learned that a lot of rejection comes with this process, but over the years being an author and putting myself out there and self-publishing my own work, I've learned not to let the opinions of others sway the way I feel about myself and my work, which Sometimes as creatives and artists, we sort of mesh those two together, even though it's not necessarily the same. I am separate from my artwork, and if somebody doesn't like my artwork, that does not reflect on who I am at all as a person. So I think going into this process with that belief already instilled in me and under my belt, I feel better about potentially receiving rejections. It doesn't mean anything about me or the work that I'm putting out there. It just means that agent is not the right agent at that time for whatever reason, and I have to trust their judgment on that. But I also am feeling much more confident about this because, like I said, I've been working on my craft for quite some time, and when I did first query, I did get a few full manuscript requests, and this was back when I feel like, compared to where I am now, I had no idea how to write a good story, and now I feel like I really know what I'm doing, so I feel much more confident about sending my work out to literary agents. So that's where I'm at right now. I wish I could tell you guys more about the book, but I don't want to give anything away just yet. However, if you've been a reader of mine for a while, you probably already have an idea because I've been talking about this idea for so long, and I am so excited to bring it to you guys. I love these characters so much. They feel like some of the best fleshed out characters that I've written so far, and even though I am deep in the editing trenches right now, I don't think it'll take much longer for this book to be ready. If you're a fellow writer and you too are currently going through the querying process, I am wishing you all the luck in the world. I'm excited to join in with you. I also know that probably a month or 2 months into it, I'll be like, why did I decide to do this to myself? So just know that I am wishing you the best. Hope that you stay in the best headspace possible as the process continues on. And if you're a reader, I truly, truly cannot wait for you to get your hands on this book. And if you have any questions for me, whether you're a reader or a writer, feel free to drop them in the comments. And if you want more behind the scenes content, I am thinking about doing more of a deep dive vlog style into the querying process coming up. Can't wait to take you guys on this wild journey with me. Thank you so much for being here. Make sure to hit like and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any updates coming your way. And that's it for now. I love you guys so much. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.